welcome. Willie, where are you? Would you like to get us started? So nice to see everybody.
Good evening, everyone. And I have to say welcome. I'm Willie Poinsett, the co-founder and president of Respond to Racism. It's my first time this year being before you, so I'll say Happy New Year, and may this year be better than the last one. And with that, let's see. I am going to be starting our program with Sarah. We need to highlight her. She's going to do our land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. So today I would like to honor the people whose lands we live on. First, the Maulala people, the Cayuse people, the Tualatin Kalapuya people, the Willamette Tumwater, the Wasco Wishram people, the Clackamas Chinook, and the other Chinook people of the Willamette area. We acknowledge them as the original inhabitants of the land and recognize we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them.
Okay,
So
go,
like that-
Willie.
Oops. Okay, so know that land acknowledgements are more than just explanations, name checking the tribes and the native nations whose lands we occupy. These statements help demonstrate respect for and awareness of the enduring relationship between our indigenous people and place. Acknowledgements do not exist in the past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and it behooves us to seek and build an understanding of our present participation. And so, welcome everyone. I am back and so grateful for all of the get well cards, the good wishes, and the meals that were delivered to my door. Heartfelt gratitude to you all. I can't tell you what it feels like to wake up on the ground in the parking lot and not know what happened to you. And so I am trying my best to be good and eat the right foods so that I don't have a repeat. And I have a great welcoming team. So know that I'm in good hands. Our mission statement for Respond to Racism is to educate and empower Lake Oswego residents and institutions with the tools to combat racism in all its forms and make LO and Oregon a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. And if you happen to sign on early, you saw slides of many of our activities, but I want to just give us a few reflections and acknowledgements because this work requires a whole team, an army. And so we start with our leadership team. I want to give you so much thanks. You've been with me from a long time, from 2017 to now. And it's been a pleasure. And make sure you say that when you talk to me, even on my off days, but it's been really a pleasure to be able to work, to do the work and see the change in Lake Oswego, Oregon, that I've seen over the past 4 years, and it's because of the work we are doing, spearheading. We're not doing it all by ourselves, but we're doing it, and we have brought on some other partners that are joining us, and we are working to make this place a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. The programming committee, what can I say? All the programs, I don't do it. We have a program committee that plans the programs that you have every month. And our tech team makes sure that things are running well. And when we're in person, we have our hospitality group that just makes sure that we are feeding ourselves, our stomachs, and are being fed, as well as our minds and our hearts. Our policing committee, under the direction of Terry Kramer, has been on the job. I can tell you the Lake Oswego Police Department knows Terry and her committee, and they're looking at making sure that our BIPOC people in particular are not being mistreated in this city. Our meeting facilitators, we couldn't do it without you. We couldn't do it without having facilitators in our little rooms when we do breakouts. And what can I say about our presenters? They have been awesome, awesome, awesome presenters. We have a youth empowerment committee, and Sarah is one of the people who is chairing that committee. And they are our youth, and we want to really highlight them and thank them and support them, as they are our leaders of tomorrow. Our board members, for me, thank you, board members, for all of the support you've given me from the beginning through our transition. And I want to put a special shout out to May Kadem, who is our grant writer. She's a board member, and she is my angel. I think that was sent to help me. All of our volunteers, our community partners, and for special programs like Bruce Poinsett, my son. I happen to have to own that. And I love recognizing my family. So Bruce Poinsett, for providing and presenting a workshop, Repurposing Your Privilege. And I am told I am not taking it. It wasn't exactly designed for me, so I didn't take it, but I've heard just great things about the program. And Catherine Phelps, I don't know what we can not say about her other than she is fantastic with the story time, with our kids, with the partners that we have. It's been a pleasure having her pick out just great books to read for the kids or get guest readers. And the kids, I'm just looking at their little faces, and I love their questions afterwards. So you can check in if you have time to have a look at our story time. For our MLK, Martin Luther King sponsors for the part this year. Unfortunately, on the day of the program, I was rushed to the hospital. So I was in the hospital, but thank you to Marvin, who stepped in and took place. Marvin Lynn is one of our board members, and he took my place, and I'm thankful for all of the Respond to Racism people that worked and made it a success. For our partners, LO for Love, for the city of Lake Oswego, for Lake Oswego Parks and Rec, and Starbucks for the coffee, and just everybody. If I did name you, just know that I thank you so much. It was a wonderful program. I just looked at the number of people who were here and said, wow, this is happening in Lake Oswego for Martin Luther King birthday. We have come a long, long, long way. I want to thank also for Kim V. too, and Terry Kramer for all of our silent meditation walks. They've done just an outstanding job. Also, Terry headed up our Juneteenth program. And thank you, thank you, thank you. I was told I didn't have all night, so I'm going to call on Ada for do a poll now. Ada?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Pat has her hand up.
Sorry.
Yes. Hi, Pat.
Hi. I just, as I forgot to put it on the list, also at the MLK event, I also wanted to thank everyone who donated to
Ada, you muted?
Former school. James John, it was Willie's former school, and people had donated COVID tests and some additional funding for that. So we are very grateful for those donations. The community was very generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, community. And happy 2022 to everyone. It's so nice to be in this company. Every month at these meetings, this is the first meeting of 2022, but every month when we have a meeting, we ask you and we recommend a number of actions. And we'd like to check in with you. We want to see what you've been doing. And so, we're going to do just an informal poll. If you would use the chat box, what action, and type in what actions did you take that were inspired by the monthly community meetings and special programs that we've been attending. And please add anything that was inspired, but not something that we specifically asked you to do, something that you did as a result of coming to the programs. And so if you participated in the silent walks, please do put that in the chat. Participated in protests. If you considered another person's perspective, you wrote letters to the school board, you changed your choice of social media sites, altered your music and reading choices, and you increased your community involvement. Is that typing going on in the chat box? Pat, please confirm that people are putting in the actions that they thank you all. Here's the poll. All right. And so let's use the poll. You can use the poll and just enter. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to enter which of these actions that you did do. That's wonderful. This is really about building culture and building community spirit, allyship and understanding. And it's wonderful that so many of you are participating in these actions. I'll wait another minute.
And then what is posted is just an example. And so certainly, I'm sure that many people have had other activities. So if you would put them in the chat, like Ada said, we'd really appreciate that.
Yeah.
It will help us really helpful for programming purposes.
And will inspire other people as well.
Exactly.
And so here we are. It's
Inspire
the month
us.
of February. Now, all of you and I know that Black history is American history, right? We all know this. But February is the month that we bring out to celebrate Black history every year in the United States. And we encourage you to celebrate every day of every year and to learn more about the key role that African Americans have played in the US history and their vital contributions to America's culture, to the past and the present. It's important to recognize and acknowledge all of the people who have contributed to the history of the United States, to be aware of the barriers that African Americans have faced and continue to face, and to just take this time to celebrate their contributions. And so for some ideas of what you can do this month, please check out the Black History Month Passport that was developed through a partnership with LO Public Library, LO for Love, African American Women of Lake Oswego and surrounding areas, and Respond to Racism. So please do check that out. It'll be in the email that we sent out. And so moving along so that we can get to our speakers, please help me to welcome our guest speakers from our Oregon Department of Justice. We have Setz-Waters, the Civil Rights Director. Faye graduated with honors from Trinity College and from Lewis and Clark Law School, where she wrote on constitutional issues like marriage, equality, and transgender rights. Faye has been a strong advocate for justice her whole life, and as a Civil Rights Director, she is committed to increasing the department's impact on civil rights issues that affect marginalized and vulnerable Oregonians. Welcome, Faye. Welcome to Respond to Racism. I'm pleased also to welcome Johanna Costa, the Hate Crimes and Bias Incidents Response Coordinator. Johanna provides direct support to survivors of hate and bias. She has dedicated her entire career to supporting vulnerable victims and survivors, including in federal, state, and tribal courts in Indian country and the District of Oregon. As the director of a local county DA's office, Victim Services Program, and she advocates for sexual and domestic violence survivors in a community-based program. So please help me to welcome Johanna and Faye. And now I turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I feel LO for love. You know, what you're doing here is just spectacular. You set the gold standard for this kind of work, and I'm so honored to be here. The opportunities that you're providing for leadership, for youth, you know, the message that this is everyone's work, you know, it's pulling my heartstrings. I love it so much. So thank you for welcoming us. And I'm Faye, and my pronouns are she and her, hers. And I'll let my colleague introduce her name and her pronunciation and pronouns. We'll get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Johanna Costa. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm honored to be here tonight with you all. I had a wonderful meeting with your organizing committee, talking about what we would present tonight, and I'm always honored to co-present with Faye. So thank you so much for having us, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay.
So I want to make sure that you have an overview of what we intend to discuss tonight. We're going to go over a review of the history of the Bias Hotline. We're going to identify the mandates under the law enforcement's mandates. What are your reporting options for reporting bias? And specifically, we're going to review the data that we've been collecting since 2020, and we're going to focus in on Clackamas County. What does the data show? We're also going to be looking at resources that will be available to you, to law enforcement, to help address this problem, as well as discuss our new Sanctuary Promise Hotline. This is a new program that we are raising up. And then in the end, we'll have some exercises to help you identify bias, and also some resources some tips that you can take with you if you encounter bias in the community, and to help you raise up your confidence if you are confronted with this, if you see it, and what to do in those situations. So in this slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 577, which is the numbers that we use when we identify our bias crime and bias incident hotline. If you look at the names of the sponsors to this legislation, these are heavy hitters. These are leaders in our state who care about equity and justice. These are the folks who helped draft and carry this bill into law. And so I want you to remember those names. Those are the folks who helped usher this bill into the new millennium, and to define and address where we are right now. So this bill came into law in 2019, and it kind of changed the way we looked at the prior law, which was called intimidation. So we looked at, after the Attorney General had done a tour around the state, and she did a listening tour, and she heard directly from victims. And what she heard from them was that, hey, nobody's listening to the victim's experience of how they're personally impacted by what happened. It's so shocking when you're the victim of a racial or any other type of attack. And to then learn what you experienced is not something that the police responds to or responds to appropriately. And so a lot of the teeth under this law was designed to address that gap in the way the law enforcement treated survivors and victims of hate and bias, as well as to kind of shore up some mandates, some requirements for them to do their work better. A lot of the categories for intimidation remain the same. I won't get into those. We discussed those last time. There's a misdemeanor classification and a felony. All that means is one is, it's all bad. One is just worse, and you spend more time, incarcerated if you are convicted of one of those types of crimes. But the majority of the things that are reported to are bias incidents. Name calling, incivility, property vandalizing, that's been vandalized, and those sorts of things. And so we get a lot of that. It's always harmful, and it's always just jarring when it happens to you. And we have, again, these folks to thank for bringing our statute up to date. It hadn't been revised in some almost 30 years. Even though we were on the front end of having one of these statutes, we kind of lagged behind in that we hadn't updated it. And finally in 2019, we did, to address a lot of the violent and graphic crime that was happening to people of color in particular. And so you'll find, I'm going to refer to Oregon revised statutes. That's the name of where our laws are housed. So we use ORS as just a short abbreviation for the law. And then the number where you will find the mandate for law enforcement is under 147380. Should you experience a bias crime or bias incident, particularly a bias incident, the law enforcement is required to refer you, if you've been a victim of a bias incident, to a qualifying local victim service in your community, or to our Bias Response Hotline. There's no, we might refer you, we'll do it only on Tuesday nights between 7 and 9. It is required. There's no discretion here. And so we spent a good portion of our time kind of explaining that to law enforcement, because I think a lot of the time under the previous intimidation law, they didn't have the authority to do anything about it. They shrugged their shoulders and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. This isn't a crime. It's an incident. People are not civil. People are racist. We have free speech. We have hate speech. As long as it doesn't carry a threat, they can say what they want, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, under the new law, when they respond to a call like this, they're required to make that referral to either one of two places. And if it's not getting done, you now have the statute where you can remind them of what their responsibilities are. You have a number of ways to contact us on the hotline. We have a telephone number. It's 1-844-924-BIAS. That's 2427. For our deaf and hard of hearing folks, we accept all relay calls, and for folks for whom English is not their first language, we have interpretations available in over 240 languages. If you don't feel like talking to us on the phone, you don't have to. There are a lot of people who just want to record what nasty thing happened, so we track that data. And so that's a really important part of the work that we do. It's not the only part, but it's a really important part, because we know what gets tracked gets attention. And we have some numbers to share with you later. Another way you can report to us what has happened that you have witnessed or has been happened to you is to contact us online on our portal at standagainst-hate.oregon.gov. So in this way, you can send us a quick message about the who, where, what's. If we need to follow up with you, if we need more information, then we can. But that's another way that you can contact us. I'm going to turn this. We have this is a piece of a snapshot. We're going to go into some detail about the numbers. This is about the data that we've collected from our hotline, and we have compiled we call them a one-pager, and it's basically a snapshot. It's a look at bias that's occurred in Clackamas County, so not all Lake Oswego. Do not be alarmed. This is not all happening in Lake Oswego, but this is for the whole county. And for some select counties, we're doing this kind of, intensive work to just friendly communities like your own, where we know we have allies who are sharing in this work, who care about changing the temperature in their community, sharing this data so that they are armed with facts about what's happening, and then they can respond appropriately. And so this is just a little piece of what we've been collecting, and I'll turn it over to Johanna, who really is, the eyes and ears and really works closely with the victims to kind of explain this funneling effect that happens from a whole bunch of things happening into the community. Some people know to report it to the hotline. Some people don't. Some people report it to law enforcement. Sometimes law enforcement classifies it appropriately, sometimes not. And then it goes to the DA's office, and the DA decides who to charge. And then it just trickles down. So you can see what started off as high numbers, really who is held accountable by our prosecutors and our criminal justice system, a very small subset of folks. We'll talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Faye. So this one pager was one of Faye's many brilliant ideas that she brought forward to the hotline to try to, as she said, engage community with what we're hearing on the hotline. Faye and I are knee deep, if not neck deep, and we hear about what is happening around the state. And yet we wanted a way to share with community and have folks engage with what is happening right around me in my area, in my county. So if you go to our website, standagainstState.Oregon.gov, this is one of our one pagers. We also have the shortened web address for you. So you can go to this website and access the one pager. You can print it up, carry it around with you, have it on your phone, have the data readily available for you. So the planning committee asked us to break down some of the images and the information on the one pager. And so first, we touched on this a little bit already, but we wanted to get down to, well, what is criminal and what is an incident under Oregon law? And so we have this graphic that shows that slurs, epithets, symbols with any type of bias motivation targeting our 7 protected classes under this statute is a bias incident. And we often see these as offensive jokes, and I use quotes around that word: hostility, discrimination, mimicking, mocking, teasing again, in using quotes around that, bullying, again, targeting someone based on their perceived identity or protected class. When that bias motivation is combined with a crime against a person or their family or their property, including their pet, that is a bias crime under Oregon law. And the bias motivation need not be the driving force. It can be just part of the motivation. So someone punches someone else because they really dislike them and they think that, they disrespected them and they took the last loaf of bread off the shelf, and they call them a slur, targeting their perceived identity. That can be a bias crime. So not just an assault, but also a bias crime for the same conduct. And so we often see this as vandalism, threats, which have to be specific, explicit, and imminent. This is not the Johanna's choice of what a threat is. Oftentimes language can be incredibly scary, can be incredibly nuanced and fall in this gray area under the law. It is very clear to the recipient what is meant. It's meant to harm and to intimidate, to frighten, to scare, ostracize, and other things like watch your back, you better watch out, you might be next. All of that language does not constitute a threat under Oregon law. It is not specific, explicit, or imminent under the law. And again, this is not what I have chosen or Faye has chosen to be the law, but it is what our courts have found based on our United States Constitution and the protection of free speech. So the threats have to be what's called a quote unquote true threat to be classified as criminal. But when we have a quote true threat plus any bias motivation, we have a bias crime. Any assault or hands-on contact, it doesn't have to cause injury. And of course, a homicide with bias motivation. All of these things can be a hate crime under Oregon law. So we include this graphic in the one pager to make sure that folks have the foundation of what are we talking about when we're talking about a bias incident versus a bias crime or a hate crime. The next thing that we wanted to share with folks is about what the data is showing in terms of what's being reported to law enforcement and what's being reported to the hotline. And those are two different things. For years, our laws have required that when a bias crime has been reported to law enforcement has been required for years to send this information to the Oregon State Police. And you can see that in Clackamas County, that reporting has increased over the last several years. Since the hotline opened, we have seen a significant surge in reporting to the hotline. Folks can report crimes or incidents to the hotline, and these numbers are not double counted. These are separate reports. When we do get a report on the hotline where someone has reported to law enforcement, we flag that so that it's not also included and we're not sort of double counting the data. And so you can see from this graphic that from 2020 to 2021, just through October, which is when this graphic was drawn up, that there's been an increase of 366% to the hotline, reporting bias crimes and bias incidents. And we can also see that in Clackamas County, reporting has been higher per capita than in most other counties. In fact, you can follow the trend along. So the shaded in area is the reporting per capita throughout the state. And then you can see the line graph that's not shaded in is the reporting in Clackamas County. We saw a significant surge of reporting in Clackamas County in January, and that coincided with both the insurrection at the Capitol in DC, as well as some significant press around an elected official in Clackamas County who had made public statements targeting a particular protected class. And I'll be specific, it was Islamophobic targeting. And so we saw a surge in reporting as folks, again, identified, hey, here's a vulnerable targeted community, and I'm going to report it to show that it's happening to me, and I'm going to report when I see it happen to someone else. We saw that also happen with anti-Asian and anti-Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian bias over the course of COVID. Again, words matter, and when our elected officials speak out and target folks, that has an impact in terms of other folks' conduct and language, as well as certainly harming entire communities of folks, putting communities in fear, scapegoating, and othering and degrading folks, and also encouraging folks to document when it happens. And so we've seen surges follow those trends, both nationally and locally. So again, you can see that the reporting in Clackamas County has, in large part over 2021, exceeded the per capita reporting throughout the state. As Faye mentioned, we wanted to draw attention to, well, what happens after bias is reported? We want to first acknowledge that bias largely goes unreported, and that's true nationally, not just in Oregon. There's a national survey through the Bureau of Justice Statistics that says that less than 3% of bias is reported ever. So we know that we're talking about an iceberg with a massive, massive underwater presence where bias is largely going unreported. But for bias that is reported, whether reported to law enforcement or to the hotline, we can see this funneling effect that happens. And the cases that we see in the news that are charged, where a conviction is achieved, or where someone has a consequence in custody in particular, it whittles down to a very, very small funnel. So from January 2020 through October of 2021, in Clackamas County, there were 289 incidents of bias reported. 114 of those were reported to law enforcement agencies. 84 were classified as criminal, and 13 of those cases were charged by the district attorney's office. So again, a significant funneling of cases. This is true in many other counties. We've done a one-pager for another county, Marion County. You can see that on our website. In Clackamas County, we've seen a lower charging rate than we are seeing in other counties. Well, who's targeted in Clackamas County? We have this information up real time on our data dashboard, which we'll be reviewing with you in just a little bit. But on our one-pager, we wanted to show the intersectionality of targeting that's occurring in Clackamas County. And just like across Oregon and across the nation, largely reports to the hotline reflect race-based and color-based bias. And specifically, they reflect anti-Black and anti-African American bias. This is true again in Clackamas County, what we see throughout the state, and what the data shows across the nation. Typically, what we see across the state is the next targeted protected class is national origin. In Clackamas County, we see religious-based bias, and specifically Islamophobic bias. Islamophobic and anti-Semitic bias are the two most common targeted religions that we see on the hotline. And so you can see the breakdown of both singularly targeting as well as intersectionality in targeting with this graphic. And then finally on our one-pager, again, this is supposed to be a piece of literature that starts conversations, that calls folks to action, that brings forward conversation and change. And so we wanted to make sure to reflect that we all have a role to play when we see bias, when we experience bias, when we hear about bias. First and foremost, we encourage folks to report. You can report anonymously, as Faye said. You don't have to talk to us. You can fill out our form on our website. It's available in 8 different languages. We can translate to additional languages upon request. On our hotline, we have advocates who speak a variety of languages. We also have access to interpreters. But again, if you just want to document, report it. You don't have to put your name, your phone number. We don't track IP addresses. It can truly be anonymous. So please, if you do see, hear about, read about, it's in your social media feeds, report it. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but if you're from dominant culture, report it and don't ask for services. If you are affected by bias, we all are affected by bias, but if you are personally harmed and triggered, please by all means reach out for services. But please, the first step would be to report. We ask that our law enforcement partners respond to, investigate, and charge bias. And we have seen since our last meeting with you all last summer, significant change in law enforcement. In fact, we want to say that Lake Oswego Police Department is leading the state in terms of their investigation of bias incidents, in terms of their documentation, the care that they show victims. We've heard over and over on the hotline, their willingness to upload their reports and share their data with us into our web portal. So with your advocacy and pressure, that was a significant change that came about. And as I said, they're doing a wonderful job in supporting folks who experience bias incidents. And that's what we're hearing on the hotline. And we'd like to see that in other jurisdictions around the state. And that's why we come to these meetings and talk to folks. But we have obligations that or law enforcement has obligations to make community feel safe, to respond in a way that folks feel supported and heard, even if it's not criminal, even if it's not something that they can charge someone with a crime. So responding to and investigate, and when it is criminal, referring cases to the DA's office for review for criminal prosecution. And then certainly tracking bias is our job at DOJ, and OSP's job under the law, and the Criminal Justice Commission's job under the law, to track this information, to share it with the community, to be transparent and make sure that folks are aware of what's happening. So again, all of this information is packed into a one-page document with language explanations, that you can use to engage in conversation with your elected officials, with your law enforcement folks, with folks in positions of power around your city and your county. So I'm going to take a pause for just a moment, if it's appropriate to ask before we dive into the data dashboard, if folks have questions, if there are things that we need to explain further.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Genezahary. I live in Milwaukee, and I'm concerned about sheltering of homeless people in various social service shelters or churches, and responses that they may receive from neighbors who resent them being present in their neighborhood and might try to harass or intimidate them as they come and go to the shelter. Would that fall under the non-protected class of individuals in terms of bias reporting?
Yes, housing status is not a protected class under this portion of law in Oregon. There are at least 2 cities in the state that are have moved. City of Eugene has identified housing status as a protected class, and the city of Bend as well. So that's something that locally, I know that different cities are looking into, but at the state level and under the state law, which dictates our program, housing status is not a protected class.
But that would not eliminate somebody from reporting that kind of harassment or intimidation to the hotline, correct?
You could certainly report it on our online web portal, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
See 5 hands raised, but the view that I'm in, I can't see who has their hands raised. So if you have your hands raised and you have a question, if you would just unmute your mic and ask it, that'd be great.
So I will speak up. My name is Kathy Salvaggio. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes, Kathy.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for collecting this data and interpreting it for us. It's very interesting and helpful for our case. But 2 quick questions. One from the presentation that I believe Johanna said that Clackamas County had a lower prosecution rate, or lower, in that sort of mountain graphic that you had, that Clackamas County has a lower level of prosecution than other counties. I'm wondering if there's anything more you can say about that. Do you know anything behind the story behind that data? And the second thing is you sang the praises of the Lake Oswego police force, which are great. It does seem to me that Respond to Racism is making some real important headway there. I live in West Lynn. Our police department is a different story. I'm wondering if there's anything you can say about West Lynn. That's it.
You know, that we work with the district attorney's office when there's a problem. When we notice that there's a when Johanna's tracking cases, this is, by all accounts, a serious bias crime. And then, it's not charged. So then, it begs the question, well, why not? So many times we reach out to the district attorney's office and ask, hey, can you give us a status update? Have you reviewed the case? Are they going to be, this has been referred for prosecution? Are you going to prosecute? So just so you know, the district attorney is an elected position, and they have discretion about which cases that they bring to prosecute. And so we don't ever always know, because they're not transparent, and nor do they have to be about their charging decisions. But, as the electorate in that community, you can ask, hey, I'm curious. Can you tell me why this was not prosecuted? And then the DA may tell you, hey, we didn't have enough evidence, or there was some other problem, but generally, this is upon the citizenry to ask the question. And if you're not getting satisfactory answers, keep asking questions. I know that Clackamas County District Attorney's Office is in the process of putting together a bias response team, a multiple disciplinary team. They recognize that there's a problem, that our numbers and their numbers don't match, and that we're getting a lot more people who contact us, who may have less confidence about contacting them, but there's some type of gap in terms of the numbers. And so again, this is a savvy group with a lot of privilege and access and curiosity. You can call and ask, hey, I see, there were 300 reports that went to the Bias Hotline. We only had how many prosecutions for bias crime? I'd like to know who's making those decisions, how those decisions are made. Just like the pressure you put on the Lake Oswego police to be better, you can also put that kind of pressure with other agencies. I'm not telling what to do, but there are options. The second part of your question had to do with, I think it was it the trickle down in the numbers between what gets reported and what gets prosecuted. We talked about, just Lake Oswego doing a better job. I mean, I think this starts with people on the street observing and recognizing something bad is happening, calling the right entity in the community. If you can start doing that in West Lynn, if there's a group like this and energized in West Lynn, I'm telling you, activism on the ground, people in positions of power and privilege, asking those questions are going to get different responses. Holding the people accountable to the work. When you witness a bias crime, you can say, hey, I was a witness. You didn't reach out to me to ask me what I saw or what I heard or how I was impacted by what I saw and heard. And I'm wondering why. Are you going to investigate? You can ask those questions. Now be prepared for somebody maybe hang up on you, maybe be rude, maybe say, I'll get back to you. But you have to keep applying pressure. Just like, Respond to Racism has done with Lake Oswego PD, you can do that with your local police departments. Knowing as much as they know, so when they're not doing their job appropriately, puts leadership in the crosshairs. We had an unnamed jurisdiction that we've been working with that has a series of problems with racism throughout their community. And the police chief said he didn't need to know. He didn't need to learn about bias. He didn't want to know, didn't need to know. And somebody got hold of that information and his position quickly changed, and he asked us for resources. He asked us for, succinct information so that he can, increase his learning and understanding of the issue. Law enforcement is required to enforce all the laws, not the ones they can disagree with, agree with, or they can't. I should not be picking and choosing which laws they intend to enforce. So that's what that's a strategy I would use, and I would encourage others to use it too. I mean, if you can't answer the question, if there's no presence on their website about how they handle these types of complaints and calls, ask them. We'd like more transparency about how you process these calls. If I witness it, what are you going to do? Test them. They may say, oh, we don't respond to that. Oh, the officer will determine when he gets there and when they get there. keep asking for information. And we are living in an era where we're supposed to be transparent. Information is supposed to be available, and to be hiding behind secrecy and not being transparent about how you operate is really a no-go for most people. I'll let my colleague chime in.
I think you covered it, Faye. That was beautiful. I'm going to call on Annie next.
Thank you so much to both of you. Two questions, if you please. One is, I just wanted to confirm, if we see hate-based graffiti, we no longer have to spend 6 phone calls banging our head and calling the Portland police. We can call you to report it, so someone's tracking what Nazis are up to in Oregon.
Yes, and I'll say that I have a good connection with the City of Portland's graffiti removal folks as well.
Thank you. And I just wanted to follow up. If I was really curious what you both, particularly Faye, since you're the attorney in the conversation, if you think there's merit to pushing for a statewide statute that requires transparency in how a DA chooses to prosecute or not prosecute, so that that murky water veil is removed. Do you think that's
No, I could say that I know that I think it was the ACLU had a concerted effort a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, to kind of help educate people about the concentration of power our district attorneys have, that their decision-making isn't transparent, that they have a lot of discretion. And in that discretion, some people get prosecuted, some people don't. I can give you a guess that who those people are. So if you're connected, I mean, when I was on the bench in Lynn County, we had a case where a person was facing a Measure 11 crime, and the DA chose not to prosecute it under Measure 11. This person was destined for medical school, and this person was deemed to have a future. This person was deemed worthy of not being entered into our criminal justice system. And so, you know, that decision, you know, those kinds of decisions are made behind closed doors. And, you know, you can look at the ACLU's website, you can see their old campaign, and it is about the district attorney's authority and power. And as an elected official, you can always make a different choice. If you're not satisfied with the way this one's been operating, you'd always request a meeting with the district attorney. Mr. Wentworth is very open about, you know, meeting with constituents about how his office operates. So, you know, I would encourage a conversation there.
Thank you.
So I'm going to keep pushing forward with our presentation. We have a really great engaging exercise at the end, and we'll also have some more time for questions at the end. I'm going to fly through our data dashboard information so we can get to the interactive engaging part. But I want to make sure that you all are aware that our data dashboard is available at any time for you all to take a look at the data. So we issued this beautiful one-pager that is lovely and designed and tells a story, but our data dashboard is available for you. Again, if you go to standagainsthate.oregon.gov, our second link on our menu is our data dashboard. We're actually going to be issuing a Spanish language data dashboard. Our website is generally available in 8 languages, but this is from a program that one of our community partners sends to us and shares with us. And so we're in process of translating it. So that's exciting and will be coming in the next few months. But in the meantime, everything on the data dashboard is clickable. And so you'll see that I've clicked here on Clackamas County, and we've had 302 reports to the hotline from Clackamas County since the hotline opened. And as you click on things, it filters the data. So if you wanted to see what happened in January when we saw that big spike, what was being reported, you could click on the month January 2021, or you could click on Clackamas County and a span of months if you wanted to look deeply at the data over a period of time. When I clicked on Clackamas County, here was how the months filtered out, and you can see the reporting that occurred to the hotline since the hotline opened through the end of 2021. And you can see, again, filtered because we clicked on Clackamas County, what has been reported to the hotline by determination. So 196 of those reports were considered a bias incident. 91 of the reports were considered a hate crime or bias crime. We had 9 reports that constituted bias solely against a class not protected under the statute. So sometimes we had someone who identified as LGBTQ and was participating in a BLM protest. And so they were targeted based on being a protester and based on sexual orientation. That would be classified as a bias incident or a hate crime. But if someone was solely targeted based on a class not protected under the statute, we had 9 of those reports in Clackamas County. We had 3 reports where the bias or hate criteria was not met, 3 reports where, based on the information that we had, we were unable to make a determination, and 4 reports where someone made the report more than one time of the same incident by the same reporter. Again, you can see that we classify the conduct into these categories: harassment, which can be criminal or non-criminal, vandalism, assault, institutional bias, when someone is refused a service or an accommodation, swatting, which is when someone uses law enforcement and calls law enforcement for the distinct purpose of having law enforcement sort of sicked against them, to send out the SWAT team to respond in a way that puts that person in danger. And doxing, when someone's private information is published online. And I mean private information like home address, place of work, children's school, email address that's not public, for the purpose of having other folks contact them and try to intimidate them. I mentioned earlier that race and color are the 2 most targeted identities across the state, across the nation, and here too in Clackamas County. But you can see the breakdown by protected class from the data dashboard as well. Each of these is clickable. So the next screen I'm going to show you is just a breakdown based on race. But if you clicked on sexual orientation, you could see the breakdown on the targeted identity or perceived identity under sexual orientation, or the targeted perceived identity under national origin. And we always make sure to flag that it's perceived identity. A lot of the times, particularly under national origin, but also in all protected classes, we see targeting where someone says, you know, go back to name of a country, or, you know, thanks for the W flu, or things like that, that make an assumption about somebody's identity, that they have Chinese heritage, that they are a Chinese national, that they have a particular identity when they may not have that identity at all. So again, this is based on the protected class targeted that's reported to the hotline. And then here we just gave a specific breakdown of targeting based on race. And so you can see the breakdown. So all of this information is available on our data dashboard. It's searchable. If you wanted to see, well, what is happening in targeting to our perceived Black and African-American folks in in Clackamas County, you can click on Black African-American on the data dashboard, and it filters the data back up. And you can see that across the state, generally targeting towards Black and African-American folks is more criminal and is more violent than targeting of other identities. And so again, all of this is clickable. We can thank the Criminal Justice Commission for this really interesting technology. I will note that we tend to focus, or today we're focusing quite a bit on the data. As a reminder, and I think Faye put this in the chat as well, the hotline is a victim service support hotline. So we do get permission to collect data. Our function is not to mine data and to share the data. Our function is to support folks, to make sure that folks have resources, feel believed, know some next step options, know where they can connect and find affinity and find additional support. help navigating systems. So that's the true purpose of the hotline. But today we're focusing on the data because, again, we're trying to help folks engage in conversations around the city. So we do have tools and resources on our website. If you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, that's one of the menu options on our website. We have a law enforcement toolkit. We have resources for victims. We have resources for service providers. So there's some great things to check out on our website as well. So Faye, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about Sanctuary Promise.
Thank you, Johanna. I absolutely do. Last legislative session, House Bill 3265 was passed into law. And this is an attempt to support folks who've been targeted for sanctuary law violations. That is people, generally law enforcement using and public bodies using resources, state resources, local resources, Oregon resources, to then report a person's citizenship status to ICE, to Border Patrol, to any federal immigration authority. And so those names that are capitalized on the top of this bill, these folks have sponsored this bill, these folks have supported this law, this legislation, and have provided Oregon Department of Justice and my unit, our unit, with the resources to raise up another hotline. So when Johanna is not, and I are not supporting victims of bias, we're working to define and figure out what does a Sanctuary Promise hotline, how should it operate? Who is this work going to benefit? It's going to benefit all of us, right? We are tired, people are tired of being targeted for these types of violations. They're tired of law enforcement and public bodies violating the law, which harms people and separates families. You know, oftentimes it's a field worker or somebody who's been exploited to come here to work under some agreement, and then they're exploited, they're trafficked, and they're pushed into the system where then they are actually a victim. And this law recognizes that. And it is an attempt to help mitigate the harm that comes as a result of that type of act, to gives us authority to investigate violations of this act, and to provide support for victims and family members who have witnessed and been subjected to a violation of the law. So it's really exciting. Our job is to curb this behavior, is to educate people and make sure that they understand what their rights are. Folks now have a right not to disclose their citizenship status, their country of birth, and this sort of things when asked by law enforcement. Law enforcement is required to tell them what their rights are in their language, in writing, if in their language, if it's requested to be translated, but always in writing, that they have the right not to disclose this information. If they do disclose this information, it could subject them to deportation proceedings. So that is something new. And it is an attempt to get at some of our far-reaching communities where law enforcement was cooperating with ICE and harming folks in doing so. So we are raising that up, and it's exciting work, but it's definitely an expansion of our work, and we're grateful to have it, that we've been entrusted to do this as well. So stay tuned on that. We have a broad section of subcommittees and committee members from around the state who are helping us get the language, get the wording right, and make sure we're going to have another campaign, a public campaign, to help educate folks about this change in the law. We were just talking today about what our tools for law enforcement is going to be. Again, this is something new, again, for them to kind of increase their understanding of the harm that they're causing, and also increase their awareness of the benefits that can flow to a person if that person is a victim of a criminal enterprise. So, that historically may have looked at all of the folks working in, say, an illegal marijuana farm all this criminal behavior. But we're now starting to recognize that some people were forced into that work situation, people are being exploited, and these folks are actually victims of crime as well. So treating them like victims and providing the resources to them for that reason. So we're really excited to be a part of this work. And if you have more questions about this bill, I'm happy to answer them. But that was just a little bit about what else we've been up to.
And I'll just add on that when our hotline is up and running, maybe Respond to Racism will have us back again, and we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing. Our hotline will specifically be for reporting violations of the law. So I was traveling on my way to court. You know, I was with my loved one was arrested. We were about to walk into the courthouse. That's a violation of the sanctuary law and can be investigated by DOJ. So the purpose of our hotline is different from existing community resources like PIRC, which is the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. They are a social service, community-based organization. They've been wonderful partners to us since we have been assigned this work. And they are a place to report and receive support for non-sanctuary promise violations. Perhaps a loved one was picked up by ICE, not in violation of this law, or perhaps someone has been in the family has been deported and a family is struggling for food or for utility assistance, or perhaps ICE is seen down at the local 7-Eleven, and you know, folks want to get the word out. And so PIRC has their own hotline, and I'm just going to give a little plug for them. So they're PIRC, PIRC, and their number is 1-888-622-1510. So 1-888-622-1510. They have a Facebook page. They have a robust volunteer program, and just are a great organization that we have been connected to in doing this work. So we do have some scenarios, and if we're ready for that, we can move on and open up the floor a little bit more for some conversation. So first, I'm just going to announce a content warning for the next slides, that we are going to be talking about bias incidents and bias crimes, these scenarios. The language, the conduct may be difficult to hear, so we want to make sure that folks are taking care of yourselves. Feel free to step away, take some space, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. We try to be cautious with language. We know that words matter. We also want to make sure that folks are aware of what we're talking about. And so we encourage law enforcement to be specific in their reports, to use the exact language, to write it out and put it in quotes. Here we have altered particular words, but we want to make sure that folks know what we're talking about. So again, just a content warning for the next slides. So this is an exercise that Faye created. Is this a bias crime, a bias incident, or something else? So this will be, this is one of her, again, many ideas for training and teaching and sharing. So who's the victim? Who would you call for help? So our first example is a school bans the hanging of Black Lives Matter and pride flags in classrooms. So we encourage you to share in the chat or raise your hand. I'm going to bring the chat box up if you have any thoughts.
on my screen, it says chat is disabled. I don't know.
Okay, so then we welcome you to raise your hand and join in the conversation. Thank you for letting us know.
The chat's available.
Yep, looks like it got fixed.
So Faye asks, is this a crime?
Well, it's a real issue. Am I on? I can't tell. Okay, it's a real issue. It hasn't been considered a crime, I don't believe, at this point. I think it's bias. And the victims, I think, are the students who can't express themselves the way they would like. And I'm not sure in the real incident who was able to help. So I guess maybe there needs to be more discussion of that part of it. Who would you call for help? Well, I guess who I would call for help initially would be to go to the administration of the school or to go to the school board. Well, that didn't seem to help in this particular real life situation. So I guess the question is, then what's next?
Absolutely. We're going to start with a plug of, you can call the hotline. You can report it to the hotline, make sure that folks are connected. Faye?
In fact, one of the things that we've been asked to do is to work with the Department of Education on safety planning, because, this is not just happening, the silencing of people, affinity signage in the classroom, supportive signage in the classroom. Who remembers No on 9? I mean, we're approaching the 30-year anniversary of that, right? So we've been here before. We've had, this kind of restriction of people's rights and this silencing of people, this intimidation that's been happening, and people, misusing power to silence and oppress folk. We've been here before. And I think as a community, we have to call it out for what it is, and remind people of this, the role that the school board is supposed to play in those kinds of things. So I wouldn't say it was a crime. I would probably look at this as a bias incident, because in the classes that it's targeting would be, people who have strong support for Black Lives Matter, Black people, pride flags, those who find themselves represented in those flags, people who love people who are represented by those flags. And so you're starting to talk about a larger and larger group. And, this idea that these symbols are divisive in an educational setting. Education is about learning, it's about talking, it's about growing. And if we're moving toward inclusivity, we need to be having civil conversations about what these symbols actually represent. And I would contact the hotline to report that this was happening in my community. You have a fairly educated and mobilized and communicative and active community. And so if this was a problem that was in your community, I suspect that this group would be very helpful in eradicating that problem.
And certainly,
I guess a question I have is, how would the Bias Hotline respond to this particular situation?
Again, our hotline isn't about investigation, it's about victim support. It's about data collection, right? And victim support. So the students or the teachers or the people who felt harmed, felt like they couldn't express what they needed to express, will be able to contact our hotline, receive support, be connected to community services, folks in the community as well, to be able to talk about this issue in a way that was supportive, that was affirming.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of conversation around what are my next step options? What is available to me? And one of the things that is available to folks in this situation is to make a report with the Oregon Department of Education. They have a civil rights department. The U.S. Department of Education could do a civil rights investigation. Folks could access an attorney and pursue civil remedies. If a student specifically identified that this type of messaging was infringing on their right to an education, that is potentially something that the U.S. Attorney's Office could look at for a civil rights investigation. If there was any type of threat involved, plus this, then the U.S. Attorney's Office could look at a criminal prosecution for this conduct. So again, depending on sort of the nuanced details, we could talk about a lot of next step options. Certainly we want to connect folks with support and affinity. And a lot of times, the intent of this is to isolate and to make folks feel alone and like they don't belong. And we would want to make sure that folks felt connected and supported. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a bunch of these, so we're gonna move on to our next one. A 15-year-old softball catcher calls the 14-year-old batter at the plate a D word. The umpire hears but does not say anything. Is this a bias crime, a bias incident, something else? Who's the victim and who would you call for help? Is there a crime? A couple folks saying bias incident in the chat. So a lot of folks saying bias incident. That's correct. If someone were to call the hotline, we would document it as a bias incident. And that's actually something that we left out of our last answer, that in your community, again, law enforcement investigates this, law enforcement documents this. And so shame on me for forgetting to remind folks of that it can be reported to law enforcement. And someone in the chat just mentioned that. So it can be reported to law enforcement for documentation. Law enforcement can refer folks to the hotline, or shall refer folks to the hotline. So someone wrote, all who hear it are the victims. The baseball organization can be one of the places that receives the report. A report to the school district, the State Board of Education, someone wrote. Any other thoughts on this one? Any questions?
We've been getting a lot of reports on this type of issue, as students go out and go into different areas. They've been targeted for racism and all kinds of name calling that interferes with the, recreational and athletic environment and opportunity. If you love sports and that's your avenue to a potential scholarship down the road, and you're derailed from that opportunity because, everywhere you travel to, someone was calling you racist names, that would really, stifle your ability to thrive in that kind of environment, right? We're talking about children here, and we're talking about adults behaving badly, and then other adults not being, strong enough, aware enough, empowered enough to say something. And so I'm really delighted by the responses I'm seeing here.
Great. just a couple of things. Certainly, obviously, the child can report to the coach. There are usually like umpire type organizations. There are certainly conferences and state athletic organizations and county athletic organizations. So those are always options, just again, in terms of getting the information out there. And I think who's a victim, again, this is sort of one of those situations where like often hate and biases, it's not just the individual, it's not just the team, it's not just, the baseball community or softball community. But as Faye was saying, this really affects folks in terms of where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, where their respite is, what their outlet is. And so anyone who feels like they don't belong to dominant culture, like they aren't seen in typical media and sports and all of these things, it can strike fear in someone. Do I want to be, and especially for kids, thinking about, being perceived as different, being outed based on, my perceived appearance or my conduct or my affect and all of those things. So everyone is harmed, and really entire communities of folks, and particularly LGBTQ folks in this situation, questioning folks can be really harmed. So, okay, so there's a question, where's the data, the 13 or 15 cases that were actually charged? So law enforcement has to make a report to the Oregon State Police, and then the DA's office files charges into a system called Odyssey. And so that's where that information is pulled from the court record of cases filed. And if I'm missing questions in the chat, I only see them when they pop up momentarily. So
I'm trying to work on them.
Okay. Great. So the next prompt here is a high school student finds swastikas painted on the walls of the bathroom. One of the stalls are the words, "Join the White Student Union." Bias crime, bias incident, something else. And I did see a question in the chat, who determines what data categories are filled in? So we try to be, oh, it looks like Faye was, oh.
No, I was responding to something else way
Faye's
behind.
responding to something else. So the answer to that is, it is a combination. So we try to be victim-centered and victim-oriented, and we come from a place of belief. We also provide a lot of education for folks. And a lot of times people will say, I was called such and such word, that's a hate crime. And so we provide some education that under Oregon law, that's called a bias incident. And sometimes folks will say, well, I was targeted based on my disability and my race, but they were called a particular slur only related to their race and not related to their disability. And so we would, again, try to provide some education around what targeting is versus what an experience is while or and identifying as a member of a particular protected class. So it's a combination of victim report and also our hotline advocates make that determination. Okay, so I think I saw, oops, and I'm 9 messages behind now. So bias, crime, vandalism, call the principal, school board, hotline, police. Great. Yeah, so when there's property damage, we're talking about a crime. Whether or not law enforcement identifies a suspect, develops probable cause, depending on how old the perpetrator is, may determine whether or not someone is prosecuted. There can be a whole variety of things, but when we're talking about tampering with damage to property, we're talking about criminal activity, and this could be a bias crime in the second degree.
There's a question, should school officials be encouraging students, parents of students who are victims of bias incidents at school to report to the hotline? If you want, I think you have to understand, like, the hotline is for data collection. So we want to report, we want a data point for what happened, where it happened, and what was involved, who was involved. We also want to support the victims. And these, we're talking about children. And then, so now we also have parents involved. And so when I think about this question, I think about who is best equipped to kind of talk to students in the moment, who has the resources to be able to help children in the moment. Our hotline is available, business hours, Monday through Friday. And depending on the volume, we may not be able to get back to that student right away. So if it's an immediate situation, I would think the resources that you have locally in your community probably would be a first stab at, but then also follow up with a phone call to let us know that what was happening in your district. Certainly, the Oregon Department of Education has a civil rights unit that can help file a report if there's a civil rights violation. If it's not a civil rights violation, certainly, parents, getting on the phone or going to the school and talking about what happened, and if law enforcement needs to be brought in to bring them in as well. We're talking about trying to address it quickly as it occurs, as opposed to us, who are a little bit at arm's length from school officials and the school district. So that's my thought to that question, but I will let Johanna weigh in as well.
I completely agree with you, Faye. I think we're talking about, when kids experience crime, the most important thing is that the folks closest to them show support. Certainly, if we're talking about folks who don't have a supportive environment, and I'm thinking specifically of our LGBTQ+ kids, then reporting to the hotline is okay. We want to make sure to help link folks up with resources that can provide some support if the adults and adult figures in their lives are not safe and supportive. But generally, what kids need in the aftermath of crime, and tons of research bears this out, is that the folks closest to them believe them, support them, and give them love and hope for the future. There was a couple of questions. How far back can someone report something to the hotline? I've had reports to the hotline of conduct that occurred in the 70s, and I get reports the same day and everywhere in between. So we know that hate and bias have lifelong, decades-long impact, and that the harm that folks experience is truly harmful and can harm to one's core, to one's heart. And so these experiences stay with folks. And if it's helpful for folks, to talk about things, they're certainly welcome to call the hotline. If they don't want to talk about things and just want to make an anonymous report, they can do that on our web portal. And then another question around who can be reported for bias conduct. This hotline is to receive reports and provide support for no matter who the perpetrator is, whether it is a neighbor or a teacher or an employer or a colleague, whether it's a person in a position of power, whether it's law enforcement, an elected official, someone known or a stranger. So anyone can report conduct perpetrated by anyone to the hotline. I will note that we are mandatory reporters of child abuse, elder abuse, and in certain cases, abuse of a person with disabilities. And we do go through that with folks if they report. on the hotline. So just making sure that folks are aware of what stays confidential and what is shared outside of the hotline.
And whoever, I guess it was Jeremy Watson who put the link to Lake Oswego School District reporting form online. Thank you for sharing that link. I didn't have any idea that that existed. That's excellent to know. And I saw some social justice resources on that page as well. So, you know, this idea of a bias response team in the educational setting has been something that's been fairly consistent in higher ed. And sadly, we need it in other levels of education as well. So.
I have a question, and I'm hearing you really clearly speak to your focus are the victims, but I'm wondering, are you doing any kind of compare and contrast of data, like if the police might have received a report, but they didn't actually forward that to, they didn't flag it as a bias crime? And so you don't get their data, but somebody else did report it to you
It
as a
depends what
bias
the
crime?
victim
And are
wants.
you
So as a victim-centered hotline, if someone says, Johanna, I'm going to tell you something and it's my deepest, darkest secret and I never want you to tell anyone ever, then no, I'm not going to follow up with law enforcement. I'll review our data collection processes, our mandatory reporting processes, and then beyond that, if someone doesn't want that information to go anywhere, it won't. If someone says, you know, when I reported to law enforcement, they brushed me off, or I didn't see them with a piece of paper and a pen out, or they didn't seem to be paying very much attention, you know, what should I do? Well, I'll say, well, you know, we have some options available and we can do some follow-up with law enforcement. We can ask for, you know, what the report number is, a case number. We can do some follow-up. Were you referred to the hotline? No? Oh, well, we can follow up and provide some education from DOJ. Hey, just wanted to make sure you were aware of your obligation to, you know, to refer folks to the hotline. So we can do that follow up, but it depends on what the victim wants.
And it is not uncommon for victims not to want to interact with law enforcement. When you become involved in the criminal justice system, it really takes over your life. You know, you have hearings that you have to appear at, and you know, many people don't want to be to see the person who committed the crime against them. It's very humiliating. You're asked questions. There are a lot of people who don't want to engage with law enforcement. So we respect that wish.
Thank you.
And we're also very careful about telling folks what they should do, or, you know, hey, you know, this is all about your options. And for many folks, engaging with law enforcement can be a really, really scary endeavor. That, you know, if, you know, calling the hotline may feel safe, having someone, not them, follow up with law enforcement can feel a lot safer in some cases than directly following up or lodging a complaint or opening an internal affairs investigation, all of which are maybe options depending on what that conduct is. But that's something that we could walk through with folks. And again, depending on the nature of the conduct, it could be anything from reporting to a sergeant to asking for an internal affairs investigation to reporting to DPSST, which is the certification board for Oregon's law enforcement. So again, it would just really depend on the situation. I do see Marvin's hand up.
Yeah, so the schools do have very clear policies now around hate speech and bias. The Every Student Belongs Act. This is a statewide act. There's another law that specifically that requires every school district to have those hate speech and bias incident teams and to actually track incidences of hate speech in a very similar way that you do. And then we have to have processes for ameliorating the concerns around hate speech and bias incidents. And there has to be education programs for teachers and principals and others as mandatory reporters. So, you know, as I was listening to the two of you, I thought, boy, we could use a couple of folks like you probably in every setting to help manage the load, so to speak. Because I think what's happening is people are feeling a little bit stressed because of just it's another thing to do, and they don't often understand the process and don't have the support that they need to be successful. So one of the things I'm wondering about is potential partnerships between your office and schools, school districts, to support this work.
It's so interesting that you say that. When this law was initially proposed, they intended to omit the school districts and law enforcement, that they believed that there were enough mechanisms in place internally in those structures to handle those complaints internally. What we have found since 2020 is everything's blown up. Those structures aren't in place. There's not trust around them. They're not supported to the degree that they need to be in terms of resources. And so, by default, and people found our number, and we just created another data point just to kind of keep track of what people are sharing with us, because it takes a lot to pick up that phone, to engage, to share something horrible that's happened to you or your loved one, or something that you witnessed. And for the moments that we have with that person, we think it's important to capture and support them where they are. And my hope is that for programs that are creating this type of reporting structure, that they think about the burden that the people who answer these calls, who do this work, encounter, because it's pretty heavy and dark stuff, and it can change your outlook on how you view people, in your community, and so you have to have it adequately staffed and supported with resources. So thank you for that, Marvin. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marvin. And correct me if I'm wrong, but every student belongs required that each school district have that policy in place by fall of last year. So this is something that should exist in your child's public school setting. And the reason that we are focusing so much on schools is because this year, one of the trends that we saw on the hotline is that 11% of all of the reports to the hotline occurred in an educational or school setting. So we're talking universities and K through 12 educational settings. So students are being exposed to this regularly, and we wanted to make sure that folks were aware of this. How are we doing on time?
It's 8:08.
Keep going, keep going.
Keep going. Okay. Maria, a high school student, learns multiple classmates of hers follow an Instagram account called Maria is a Slave Who Should Die. Bias crime, bias incident, something else. So we have one person who says it's a bias crime. And if we remember that the rules around what constitutes a criminal threat under Oregon law, explicit, specific, imminent. I guess our big message, this is a tough one. Our big message to you is, do you need to know the difference, or can you make a report? You can absolutely make a report is the answer. Your local law enforcement office will, if they don't know the answer, will document it anyway and bring it to a supervisor. I think a complicating factor here is that it is online. And so I believe we talked about this last summer, that when conduct is online, we could be talking about federal crimes. In this case, what we have seen is that this does not constitute a bias crime. This is a bias incident. There is no who should die, unfortunately, and I'm going to make this analysis. How? Who's going to do it? Is it by drowning or tripping and falling, or and so what we have seen, and again, this is not the Johanna opinion, this is not what I think should be the case, but that this is a bias incident and is not specific or imminent to constitute a crime under Oregon law. That's can be disappointing, frustrating, scary information. That is what we have seen over again in terms of our interactions with law enforcement and what is chargeable. Certainly, there are options, and we have direct contacts with social media to get hate speech like this removed. There is, depending on if there's other language, and if there is a crime, then there can be subpoenas for the records of these social media places to find out IP addresses and track this type of information to track down who the perpetrator is. But what we've seen again in a lot of jurisdictions is that this is not tracked or traced. Okay, we've talked a lot about resources in a school setting. I'm gonna do the next scenario, which is a Black woman finds a noose on her car in the parking lot at work. Her white colleagues' cars are untouched. Is this a bias crime, a bias incident, or something else? Who's the victim? Who can you call for help? Oh, sorry. Anyone have thoughts on this one? Is it a crime? This one's a little bit tricky. So a couple folks who say that it's a bias incident. As of January 1st of this year, it is a crime. Last year's, I think it's Senate Bill 398, states that displaying a noose with the intent to intimidate, and the person would any person in that position would objectively feel intimidated, is criminal conduct under Oregon law. So that's a new law that passed last summer and went into effect in January. And certainly folks can call law enforcement, can call the hotline for help connecting with law enforcement, for support and connection to resources and support. Great. Certainly, I would, depending on this person's experiences at work, making sure that we're connecting her to HR, an employer, that there's a safety plan, someone is keeping an eye out while she walks to and from her vehicle. A noose, as finally acknowledged with this piece of legislation, is a very specific message, and it intends to terrify. It is a message about death, and it is now classified as very specific and imminent. Okay. Keep going. One more. That's it.
8:15.
Trina?
Yeah, sure. You guys need to wrap up. You have something else? I love the scenarios, but I think there's one more question in the chat, maybe.
Oh, so we don't know the reason. The question is, the good news is that only 13 of the called in or reported 300 plus county allegations in nearly 2 years were deemed serious enough to require actual DA charges. Although one is too many, it would be valuable to know the outcome of the 13.
So oh, Faye, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just wanted to read it out loud.
Okay. The Criminal Justice Commission does an annual report for us. By statute, they're required to do the research into what's reported to the hotline, what's reported to OSP from all of the law enforcement agencies, what the DA's offices are receiving, and then what they're charging and what they're getting convictions on. I would not say that only 13 were deemed serious enough to require actual DA charges. I would really reframe that and say that all of this conduct is very serious, very harmful, terrifying, ostracizing. And in terms of criminal conduct, we have seen all over the state decisions around prosecution that are not reflected under the law. I'll give a specific example of a police report that we read where a white female threatened a Black man with a knife and called him the N-word over and over again. The victim reported being called the N-word. To the bartender who supported the white female perpetrator reported that she used the N-word. 2 independent witnesses reported that she used the N-word. The defendant, who was charged with menacing the white woman, said, yeah, I used the N-word, quote, because he was being one. Was a bias crime charged? No. Was it a bias crime? 1000%. So unfortunately, just because a case is charged or not charged does not reflect its seriousness, does not reflect whether or not there was evidence to charge. There are sometimes a number of factors that go into charging a case. And perhaps, certainly in this case, it was not based solely on the evidence. There was a question based on the victim's credibility. In this case, how could you charge the menacing but not charge the bias crime? You certainly had enough external witnesses to support that bias statements were made. And additionally, and this is outside of Clackamas County, and additionally, there is Oregon Supreme Court case law, State v. Hendricks, that says bias motivation only need to be a fraction of the motivation. So I would just caution that we cannot just go by the numbers that come out from Odyssey and what is reflected in the court system. And in fact, it's dangerous to do so, to be so trusting of what those numbers show. And certainly what we see on the hotline is that again, folks experience terrifying bias incidents and bias crimes that go uncharged and unacknowledged. Faye, I don't know if you have additional comment or.
I would just remind people that we're capturing just 3% of the related activity that is occurring out there. Again, for a number of good reasons, this is underreported. And so we're very mindful of the numbers that we do get, where we know they don't reflect all of the behavior that's happening out there.
Yes, and someone pointed out that many open cases where a suspect is never identified, those are not counted in the 13. So those are cases where it's state v. Mary Jones, it's state v. whomever. And so when a suspect is not identified, that's certainly one of the reasons that a case would not be charged.
I wish the DA would be more transparent about why they weren't charging cases. Hey, we didn't have enough evidence, but there was no suspect, whatever it is, you know, to bring closure for people, you know, that this wasn't just left to languish, this wasn't ignored, this wasn't deemed not important enough to pursue. Wish list.
Well, Trina, I don't know if you're our facilitator to wave us out for the evening, but we always enjoy being invited and having robust conversation with you all. Certainly folks who have bias to report can report on our web portal. I'll note again that we encourage folks, if you have experienced bias, you belong to a protected class, you are from a community impacted by inequity, please call, receive support, connect with an advocate. For folks who have privilege, who have positional power, who identify as a member of dominant culture, please absolutely report the bias. But perhaps don't ask for a call back from the hotline staff. Let us focus our resources and our energy towards folks who are requesting support. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Can you unshare your screen so we can see everybody? Thanks so much for coming. Hi, Willie. You're muted, Willie.
Hey. Thank you, Faye and Johanna, for your presentation. It's a lot of information to take in, a lot to think about, and to know when to act and what to expect or not expect, I guess. But thank you. This will not be your last time. So the programming committee will reach out to you again for our next steps there to think about how do we keep talking about this and talking about this so that people are holding, whether it be the school districts or our community groups or somebody, whomever, the police, accountable for things that happen so that they don't just slip. And also let it be a teaching tool for our kids so that they learn, because a lot of times they do it. It gets to be fun to do some things, and it's very harmful. Also, I'm very concerned about social media and what's happening. So don't let this be your last time. I think we need to just keep hammering at it until we get it done. I think Trina is waving bye to me, huh? Okay, I won't go on and on and on. Thank you all for being with us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. So bye, I'll say it.
Bye.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
I forgot something. Sorry. Trina has announcements. That's why she was waving.
I was waving because it was applause. Applause. Everybody thank Faye and Johanna for the excellent presentation. So much information. I love the scenarios. Thank you so much. I only have a couple announcements because you actually got an events email. I want to make sure that that you know about the Vanport exhibit that is through our very own Lake Oswego Public Library. Please take a chance to visit that. It's going to be finished February 8th, I think is the last day. Also, I'm going to put in the chat a list of Prosper Portland's favorite Black History Month leisure activities. And I have one last thing, and I don't want to embarrass him. but our very own Bruce Poinsett is the recipient of an Oregon Humanities Community Storytelling Fellowship, where he will be creating stories for publication in the Oregon Humanities Magazine this year. Congratulations. Love to you all. Have a wonderful day. See you next time.
Bye-bye.